Hi, I'm Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching us tonight. Finally, the USA attacks ISIS on the ground. That's the subject of this evening's Talking Points memo. Over the weekend, we learned that an Army Delta Force team crossed into Syria from Iraq, killing about a dozen ISIS jihadists, including Abu Sayyaf, a top leader. Sayyaf's wife was captured along with a bunch of computers and cell phones. A young woman kept as a slave by the couple was rescued. No injuries to the Delta team. In just a few moments, Colonels Hunt and Peters will have the inside story on the dramatic operation. At the same time, ISIS was being confronted by the Americans. The Iraqi army was retreating from an ISIS attack on the town of Ramadi, which is now under ISIS control. Reports say the Iraqis once again panicked, fled the battlefield. ISIS fighters then slaughtered hundreds of people, according to reports by the Associated Press. Another horror. Here's how Secretary of State Kerry reacted.
It is possible to have the kind of attack we've seen in Ramadi, but I am absolutely confident in the days ahead that will be reversed. Large numbers of Daesh were killed in the last few days and will be in the next days.
Well, you're not going to reverse the brutal execution of all those civilians. And the brutal truth is that the Obama administration and the entire world have allowed the ISIS savages to gain power and murder thousands of innocent people. Thousands. They're not hiding in the mountains of Pakistan. ISIS is an organized army fighting a ground war in Syria and Iraq. Yet the world stands by and doesn't really care, even though the danger to the world is apparent.
I'm very worried about the Islamic State. It is now in at least 12 countries around North Africa, around the Middle East. It is organized. It is an impressive fighting force. It occupies territory. It runs a government. And most importantly, it is evil. And it annihilates in the most brutal of ways. And so I think that we have to get very serious about what we're going to do, not only to contain, but to eradicate this force.
Senator Feinstein is correct. Now, there are two strains about ISIS and Iraq that may influence the upcoming presidential election. First, there's no question that pulling all U.S. troops out of Iraq directly led to groups like ISIS quickly achieving power in that country. President Obama's top military advisors warned him against the withdrawal. He did it anyway, telling the world the war had been won.
We're leaving behind a sovereign, stable, and self-reliant Iraq with a representative government that was elected by its people. We're building a new partnership between our nations. And we are ending a war, not with a final battle, but with a final march toward home.
Well, Hillary Clinton's going to have to deal with that miscalculation, as she was Secretary of State when it happened. So part of the ISIS debacle could be assigned to her, unless she can demonstrate that she herself told President Obama not to withdraw the troops. Also, it's apparent that President Obama does not have a cohesive strategy to defeat ISIS going forward. Does Hillary Clinton have one? We don't know. On the Republican side, the nation saw how Jeb Bush struggled with the Iraq war question last week. Although some still believe the coalition invasion of Iraq in 2003 was the right thing to do, President Bush and Vice President Cheney among them, history will show that the tribal divisions inside that country made it impossible for a non-dictator to govern Iraq effectively. The Sunni-Shia hatred runs so deep, unity was impossible, and Iraq has now fallen apart because U.S. forces are not there to impose order and prop up the army. It's safe to say that the American government did not understand the brutal Iraqi internal situation when the war started. It is also a fact that nation building is no longer a viable strategy in the Muslim world. Talking Points believes history will judge that both presidents, Obama and Bush, made serious mistakes in Iraq. While removing Saddam Hussein in the face of a worldwide terror threat after 9/11 may have seemed like a sound tactical decision at the time, the unintended consequences have been staggering for America and the world. The empowerment of Iran at the top of the list. So now the USA has to deal with an aggressive terror threat, ISIS, which is expanding. But because the nation has been exhausted by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, decisive action against ISIS has been very difficult. But the next president must defeat ISIS, or face ongoing terror violence that could be cataclysmic. And that's the memo. Now for the top story tonight, reaction. Joining us from Washington, Charles Krauthammer. Am I making any mistakes here, Charles?
Yeah, one major one, which is that there was nothing inevitable about the collapse of Iraq. There was nothing inevitable about it being ungovernable unless it had a dictator. Obama was right when he made that statement. That was on the eve of departure in 2011. He said this is a moment of success, and as you showed, described Iraq as it was at the time, stable. This is the post-surge Iraq that David Petraeus brought about. So the question to ask candidate the Clinton, and this you haven't heard, what you hear of the press always asking Republicans about the original decision. Remember, Iraq has been a policy issue longer for Obama than it has been for Bush. He's been looking after this policy for 6.5 years. The question for Hillary is, when you were in the Senate, you opposed the surge. You said it wasn't working, and you implied in your questioning of David Petraeus during the surge that he was lying. Do you think that was a mistake? How about asking that? And the second question is, when we decided to withdraw entirely from Iraq in 2011, as you indicated, Bill, against the advice of the military, it was obvious what would be the result. You, Secretary Clinton, were the Secretary of State in charge of our diplomacy. Did you oppose that? It was a mistake.
Yeah, we didn't know. She almost disappeared.
So?
But I have to quibble with one thing.
She's got to answer those. The press has to ask those questions and not just hector Republicans with questions about Iraq.
But you remember, Hillary Clinton,
by Republicans.
Hillary Clinton's not answering any questions, and I don't expect her to anytime soon.
But she needs to be embarrassed, and the Stephanopoulos of the world ought to be embarrassed into asking those questions of her.
But I don't think anybody's going to get a chance to ask her anything because her strategy is, I'm going to go around the media. But
she has to come out of her bunker sometime.
The blood and treasure spent in Iraq was not worth it, in my opinion, all right, because we miscalculated how difficult that situation would be. Remember Vice President Cheney saying after we invaded, Iraqis would be out there with flags, welcoming the liberators. Finally, we're going to have a free society and democracy, which is what we offered them. We did offer them that. And you're right, the surge turned it around militarily, but still there was an underpinning among the American public, and all the polls say that, Charles. It wasn't worth, the whole exercise wasn't worth it, because Saddam Hussein wasn't a direct threat to the United States. And I think the American public is still there, Charles. I don't think they've changed that opinion, which is why the upcoming presidential election has to be framed in, what are you going to do against ISIS now? I don't think I've ever heard Hillary Clinton address ISIS. Have you?
I don't think she's addressed anything.
But ISIS in particular. Have you ever heard her address ISIS? I haven't.
No, I haven't heard her talk about that. I haven't heard her speak about trade. I haven't heard her talk about anything. But as I say, you can't run and hide forever. You're a candidate. At some point, you're going to be asked. I want the press to be asking the hard questions.
Charles, I'm going to disagree with you, and I know you're much smarter than I am, and I feel humbled in disagreeing with you. I think the Clinton strategy is going to be, here's a Clinton strategy. Here's what's going to be, Charles. And write this down. We're going to raise $1.5 billion. We're going to go around the media. We're not going to engage the media ever. We may have a few friendly interviews that are going to be scripted tightly, but we're going to go around, put together our coalition of the willing, all right, groups that are going to benefit from a Democratic presidency, and we're going to hope for the best. That's what I think the strategy is going to be, Charles.
So are you telling me that they're not going to have any primary debates? She's going to stiff everybody.
Debates are different than journalists. Debates are different than journalists.
In a debate, a journalist can ask a question
and she can dodge the question all day. Why do you think I don't host the debates? Why do you think I don't do them? Why do you think they wouldn't even show up if I did them? Because you ask the question, they dodge the question, and that's the end of it. You don't get people going, hey, you're a pinhead, you're not answering my question, Charles. You never get that. You know that.
Look, in the debates in 2012, George Stephanopoulos, out of the blue, asked Governor Romney about banning contraception, which was not an issue anywhere. He returned to it 5 times, and that became a national issue for months.
All right. You don't expect anybody to do that this time. And maybe somebody will if she continues to dodge. Maybe the moderators of the debate will be so angry that they go after her. Maybe.
You've got to shame them into doing it, Bill. That's your job.
All right. Believe me, I'm up to that task. Charles Krauthammer, everybody, and Things That Matter. Krauthammer's big bestseller, now out in paperback with a brand new section on the Obama years.